Welcome to the Tough Fish, and let me introduce to you my friend Carmela Dutra. Carmela, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Jen, for having me. This is an honor, and I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I would like to jump in and let people know about, so I know you've written children's books, but I'd really like to talk about you as to kind of how you got there first. So what inspired you? Have you always had a writer's heart? Have you always had, and I know you illustrate your own books, so have you always had an illustrator's heart?
The illustrating, yes. I've been professionally illustrating for at least the last 15 years.
Wow.
My father owned an auto body shop for roughly around 40 plus years. And when I was around 15, I started learning how to do pinstriping, the traditional pinstriping with the old like brushes and the actual paint and everything. So I've done different areas of illustration or different types of art and illustration for so long. So that's always been there, whether it's illustrating for other people, which I've done for other people from back east, other authors. The writing side, I did take creative writing in school. That wasn't where my focus was. I actually had my associates and everything in photography. So I was a
Okay.
professional photographer for 10 years, and I'm a lazy ant, and that's how the books came about.
So keep going. What do you mean that you're a lazy ant?
My nephew wanted for me to draw some pictures for him to color, and my niece wanted me to create a story for her. And I didn't want to do double the work, so I just put it all into one, and that's how my first book came about. So my first couple of books were written for my niece and nephew, who back then, this was over 10 years ago, around like 7, 8 years old they were. And that's when The Adventures of Lorenzo the Bear was born. And from there, it's just been building, and ideas have kept coming.
So talk a little bit about Lorenzo the bear. What was it, just be something as you were coming through that story, for instance, what helped you to create it? What helped you to create his stories? And I know it's a series too. So what in particular, was it about teaching? Was it about fun? Was it about, I know that you've talked about compassion and bringing goodness out, but I'm just curious if there were themes behind the stories.
So Lorenzo, the idea for him actually came from a stuffed bear that I had as a child named Lorenzo. When I was afraid of the dark, my dad gave him to me, and he said that Lorenzo would protect me and he would help me to get over my fears of the dark. And that was, I just remembered about Lorenzo and how he would help people, and he helped me. And so then I wanted to have Lorenzo come to life and actually help his friends. So the Lorenzo the Bear series is focused on friendship, seeing the good in others, and just overall a fun time with it.
Oh, that's awesome. That is really awesome. So what was the journey like for you to get Lorenzo's books published? What did that feel like? Did you run into obstacles? How did you go from that process of getting that book going, getting the, overcoming the lazy ant and having the present ready to actually, to it actually becoming a physical thing that you were putting out into the market?
I didn't have any intentions of it ever becoming anything more than just something for my niece and nephew. I wrote the first 2 books, I illustrated them, and it was my family and my husband who kept encouraging me, like, you should really try and do something with this. And I didn't want to bother with it because that's not what I wrote it for. I wrote it for my niece and nephew. So my husband took it upon himself to query author or to query publishing houses for me. So a lot of rejections, which is, I'm okay with that. I'm okay. None of that really bothered me because I never expected anything to happen with it. I think I may have received, I don't know, maybe 40 something rejections, and I received 2 offers of representation,
Nice.
and it just did not feel right. Both of them wanted to change everything about Lorenzo. They liked the name Lorenzo, they liked the idea, but one of them really wanted to have the whole theme centered around Native American because of where the publishing house was. And I think that's a fantastic, fantastic idea. Maybe I'll even have an idea for that one day. That's just not what this particular story was about.
Right.
Lorenzo the Bear, the first book, he was a squash-buckling bear who was sword fighting with Lord Boris the red-butted baboon. So I wasn't really going to be able to change that too much to fit into a Native American theme without completely reworking my entire story. And then the other one, there was something else with the other offer that just didn't set well. So while I appreciated the opportunity that was presented to me, I respectfully declined. And then I ended up receiving another offer of representation that I went with. And I was with that publishing house for maybe 5 or 6 years before we parted ways.
Very cool. And I really love that you make the point of saying that the rejection, it happened a few different times, enough times that after a while, it can start to get to you, depending upon what's going on, but and depending
yes.
upon your expectation or your intention from going in. But what I really love what you just said about the fact that you received offers, and if they didn't feel right, you said no, which when you're first getting that offer after so many rejections for
It's
all that
exciting.
yeah, you kind of want to do a happy dance in your pajamas and like,
I did.
yeah, exactly.
It was very exciting. And I thought on it, and I did not want to just because something was offered to me after receiving so many rejections, I didn't want to just jump into it. And that's even now. So even now I'm in the process of querying to work with an agency. And I've been meeting with rejections, and that's just kind of something that goes with it. You have to have tough skin in order to be in this business. You have to be able to accept criticism, and criticism is really good because it can help you to grow. You have to be able to take it and be in the right place to take the criticism, especially if it's also constructive criticism, because there is a difference between the two. And thankfully, I do have thick skin, so I didn't let the rejections stop me. They still haven't stopped me. But just, yeah, it was very exciting to receive those offers. In the end, though, it just didn't feel right. And it's a part of you that you've created. It's your baby, you're birthing it, you're doing all this, and you want to make sure that you're giving it the best that you can do with it. And if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel right. So sometimes the puzzle pieces may look like they fit, but they don't always go together very well.
That's a great analogy. Would you go back to what you just were talking about with with the rejection, but also goodness gracious, this escaped me. Great.
The criticism, the constructive criticism part?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for helping me with that. Because I mean, with the constructive criticism, there is a difference, like you just said, but there's also a savviness in knowing when is it truly constructive and when is it criticism, and how to decide when this is the thing to listen to and when is it going, thank you, but no thank you. So what would you offer to that?
That is a really good question.
That's why I had to pause, apparently.
That is a really good question. I will say, so like I did mention, I was with a very small independent publishing house for a few years, and there is a give and take that has to happen. Mm-hmm. And I did receive criticism from them, and you have to determine what is it that you're willing to give in order to receive, and how also is it, for me, sometimes how is a criticism being delivered? What points of it are the specific areas that are to help better it? Criticism really should be like a sandwich. You should have the compliment, the criticism, and the compliment. And if you have that, the criticism sandwich, and you have the compliments that are sincere, and then you have the constructive criticism with it, then for me, that's where I will step back and I'll take a look at it. Because in the end too, they do also have more experience than me. And I'm not so dogmatic of, this is how I'm going to be, this is how this book is going to be, this is how the illustrations are going to look. It's a partnership and you need to work together. It can't be a one-way street.
I think that's a sound piece of advice to be sharing, because sometimes, to your point earlier about this is the baby that you've created, you've been spending all this time on it, and you spend a lot of time creating, researching, writing, rewriting, redoing. So there is that balance of how much do you allow it to be shaped, and how much do you say, no, not this part. We can do this, but not this. So I like how you were describing that. So I know you have another series, the Little Katie series, and I know that she is all about STEM and
Yes.
STEAM, actually. And so would you talk about her some?
Little Katie she was born through Lorenzo. For the longest time, I only ever saw myself continuing the Lorenzo the Bear series. And one day I saw an image online of a little girl reaching for the stars. And I started thinking about a little girl taking a trip to the moon. And it just started snowballing from there. I've had the privilege of working with several different school districts for the last 7 years. And that has been so helpful to me in knowing how to shape my books because Little Katie is an educational series. I would compare it to something similar to maybe the Magic School Bus, where you have the educational element meets the imagination element, and then they come together and they just blend together both facts and fiction. And that's what Little Katie is. So every story you learn something in the STEAM realm: science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. Each book will encompass one of those areas. So the first two books are more on the science side, where Little Katie goes to the moon and you learn moon facts and different tidbits. And I learned a lot of research doing for this book, so much that I was unaware of. And then in the second book, Little Katie explores the coral reefs. You learn more about the importance of the coral reefs, what is it they do for us, the animals that live there, and then ultimately how we ourselves on land can help by taking small steps to care for the coral reefs and protect them.
So, okay, that's amazing because now I'm thinking about the research that you probably had to do to go into this. So if you take one of those stories, did you pick one that you were just curious to learn more about and then just use that as a catalyst to start researching and figuring out how to, architect the story basically? Or how did that, talk a little bit more about that process? Because that sounds really fun between possibly how the researching comes into play and how it takes shape.
Kind of, yeah, kind of a little bit of both. I do love space and all of the unknowns with it, and all the different possibilities that exist out there, and the what we still have yet to learn and to discover. And originally, that first book, Little Kitty Goes to the Moon, was not going to be a fully educational book because there was, in the
Okay.
very beginning, a little orange alien who lived on the moon. And while it was really cute. I had the little illustration of the little orange, fluffy, fuzzy alien that was hopping around, but I knew that I wanted it to be educational and I wanted it to focus more on that. So I removed that area and I spent 4.5 months just researching different things using the NASA website, going to the library, pulling books by hand, countless hours on the internet. I happen to be fortunate where we live in Silicon Valley. I do also happen to have a NASA research facility nearby. So I was able to get a lot of help there too in
Cool.
finding different information that I needed about this book. So, for example, one of the things I learned was the lunar laser ranging experiment that Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong left on the moon. And they use retroreflecting mirrors to determine the distance between the Earth and the moon. And that device is still on the moon today, and they still use it today and still sending and receiving.
Oh, that's amazing. That's really cool. Okay, I didn't know that. That is awesome.
So I didn't know that either. So that was just some of the things that I learned. And then, like I mentioned, because I have the opportunity to work with schools, I'm able to talk with the educators, pick their brains, and see what it is that they're looking for in books and what's going to help them in the classroom. Because that's what Little Katie is. She is a book that can be used at home or in the classroom, and the series fits with the Common Core standards. So I've had a lot of help from different teachers giving me ideas, things that their students are struggling with subject wise to use for future stories.
That is wonderful because that's going back to, again, that partnership, that give and take, but you're basically augmenting the school. You're augmenting the classroom experience for that child to help them to have another way of learning material, because sometimes that there's one way you can learn material and maybe that works, but maybe there's a different way, and maybe a different way to tell the story, or maybe it's more visual or what have you, that's when that thing kind of clicks and all the pieces kind of slide into place. So that's I love the fact that you reached out with the schools and that it's a partnership, a teaming effort to help create that. So would children's books still be your favorite genre to write?
That is an interesting question. I'm a big kid at heart, and I do love children's literature. There's a lot
Me
that can be
too.
done with it, and you can share so much with a child
Yeah,
through books. Having two small children myself, I see how much they love books, and so being able to have a share in that to encourage and foster that love of reading. I do believe it takes a very special ability to write books for children, because there's a fine line of keeping their interest. The illustrations tell just as much of the story, if not more of the story. And then when I try and throw the educational aspect in it, I'm trying for it not to feel like just a textbook throwing facts at them.
absolutely.
So I will always continue writing children's books, most likely. I have at least 3 other stories in the works for little Katie and 1 complete manuscript that I'm currently querying to agents about. But I have very exciting news. I just officially started my new fiction book for adult literature, which I've been wanting
Oh,
to do for the last 10 years. I've always wanted to create a piece of adult literature. So I'm very excited that I finally was able to take a small idea that I had and turn it into something. So I've now written my first 2 chapters in that book.
congratulations. That is
Thanks.
awesome. That is so cool. I love that because to me, that's that writer's heart coming out in it's the creative heart. But I know what you mean about that being that inner kid. Yeah, I've got one too. So I totally relate to what you were saying about writing for kids and just that appreciation for it. It's just there's just something really fulfilling about that it can write other pieces, but that's still just so much fun to do. So
I will say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to ask you, what about so was the leap a little bit harder to make in a sense of when you have focused so much on a picture book series or tailoring it to children to then leap into a slightly different arena? Was that hard?
Yes, it was. I've never had to use such descriptive writing before.
Mm,
Just coming up with like the character and explaining what the character looks like. I've never had to go into that much detail to describe a person's eyes or their stature. If if one of the characters has a tattoo, how do I describe the tattoo in a way that's intriguing to the reader? Because I'm writing for somebody else to read it, and I want them to be enthralled with it. I want to captivate them. So it was very different going from, little Katie said, or little Katie giggled, to Scott glowered as he at me as he took a sip of his cup of coffee. So I mean, there's just a difference. Although it is really fun because I'm able to use a much bigger vocabulary in this book that I'm working on versus the children's books, which I
good.
don't shy away from a larger vocabulary in the children's books because I do think that's important. But you do have to keep it on par with their age and the range of the grades that I'm working with.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, to your point about the character development for the adult piece, what have you found that has helped you so far to get to know your characters then?
I have been chewing the ear off of my husband and my best friend and sharing things with them, and then kind of getting their feedback on based on this name, how do you envision this person to look? I'm curious what your thoughts are on it. Does my description here match what you have in your head, or is this going to be a complete shock and awe to you that I describe her as only being 5'4", but in your mind was she actually closer to like 5'7", 5'8"? But it has been fun to bring out different parts of myself into some of the characters. And that was one thing that my best friend was telling me. She's like, as I was reading this, I picked up on you. And I'm like, I'm not a man in his mid 40s. And she's like, no, but you're a coffee snob like he is. And I'm like, oh, yes, that is true. so there's definitely been a lot of fun there in creating the different characters. And I'm really not sure where some of them are going to go. I'm just letting it come out and see what happens and where they lead me.
Very cool. So when you're writing, whichever genre, whatever is on your plate at that moment, have you ever encountered a space where you feel stuck and affectionately called writer's block? Some say that they've encountered it, some may not have, but I'm curious, have you? And if so, what'd you do about it?
Yes, multiple times. I also have illustrator's block too, where
Okay.
I have to step away at that point. I usually just have to step away from what it is I'm working on because oftentimes I'm just too close to it. And I'm so fixated on making it work that I just get more and more sucked into this void of not knowing where to go with it. So usually I just take a step back. Sometimes I'll ask for help or I just move on to something else. So, like, for example, when it comes to my children's literature, one question that the kids ask me a lot is what comes first, the illustrations or the story? And sometimes the illustrations come before the story. I'm
Mhm.
not able to get the words to flow, but I have an idea of how I want that image to look. So I'll work on the sketch for that page, and then I'm able to get the words to come with it. So that's usually will help me in terms of the picture book side. But also a good author is a good reader. So whenever in doubt and stuck, pick up a book and start reading.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm a big reader too, so I appreciate that, hearing that too. So, can we talk a little bit about marketing, especially from, you're marketing a business, you're marketing this a book or a series, or just in general the business brand of, hey, that's what's going on here. Do you have any tips or suggestions or uh, ideas to share?
I would say the biggest thing that I've noticed for myself personally, and also other authors that I'm connected with online, don't focus on the numbers, focus on the people. Make the connections with the audience, make that personal individual connection. Because if you're only focused on growing your numbers and reaching a certain amount so you can get the swipe up ability, you're not going to have the same genuine connections and you're not going to be able to really build that community that you're looking for. And being real in your posts, being honest and sharing not just the pretty side of writing, but sometimes sharing the messy side of writing. There's a man that I'm friends with who's writing his first novel as well. And this morning I saw a post that he made, and it was a 4 grid image of the struggles that a writer goes through. And the first, he's happy, he's face palming, he's sad. Another one, he's like, ah, and it's so true. And he was asking the question, how many other writers feel these same emotions in one paragraph when you're trying to write? And I was really able to connect, and that really resonated with me because yes, I do feel that way. And getting the thoughts from the readers and fellow authors, it helps me to just build those better connections and to support each other.
Oh, I love that. That is so true. There's something really magical when you find that you just kind of click with somebody, and then you continue to kind of grow in that way. To me, I really appreciate that too. I mean, it's nice to have follows and it's nice to follow, but in the same breath, I think the connection part about it, when you meet someone or you see someone going, I really like what you're about, or I love that story, and you feel like there's just a little bit more there. It's more
Yeah.
meaningful, I think.
I know for myself, there's so I follow multiples of my favorite authors. I mean, you can't just pick one favorite author most of
I
the time.
agree.
And there are two that they're on auto buy for me. When they come out with a story, it's like, I know that's it. Click, pre-order, I'm done. I've fallen in love with the way that they weave their stories. And it's meant so much to me in how they communicate back with me when I comment on their posts, when we actually have discussions, and then they started following me back, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is a fangirl moment, oh my goodness. But there's such a difference in connecting not just with them as a person, but then the way I feel about their pieces as well, because they're taking that genuine personal interest in their readership. And
Yeah.
then there's others that I follow and I still love their work, and they're more quiet. They'll post something, but then they stay more quiet with their audience. I still love their work. They're still on auto buy for me, but I don't have that same personal connection that I do with some of the other authors that I follow.
That makes sense. That makes total sense. I think that all makes sense to me. Um, so do you ever deal with negative chatter? Like when you're writing or illustrating, is there ever something that kind of gets to you? Maybe it's the writer's block, but is there something that kind of, instead of just flat out blocking and more so going, what are you thinking? How is this a good idea? Or that looks like crap. What are you really
Myself.
going to do something with this? How, that's, what are you going to do with this piece? Have you ever encountered something like that? And how do you, does stepping away still help with that? Or do you do something different?
I am my own worst critic, as I feel most artistic people are. Anybody who works on anything creative, whether it's writing, whether it's illustrating, no matter what it is, cooking, you are going to be your own worst critic about it. And I can't tell you how many times I have done an illustration and I just, nope, and I crinkle it up and I throw it at the garbage can, and my husband will pick it up and open it. What are you doing? This is a beautiful piece. I'm like, no, it's not. Do you see the way that eye looks over there? No, that's cross-eyed. That's got to go. For me, the biggest struggle that I have is when it comes to my illustrations, I am a perfectionist and I'm constantly changing something. So my illustrations in each book are slightly changing from one to the next to the next. So the concept of how little Katie looks still stays the same. She still has her button eyes and her signature red curly hair, but there's other areas that I'm starting to change. Sometimes I change the medium that I'm working with, from just watercolors to now using gouache paint instead. Lorenzo the Bear, I did a very vintage style, going for colored pencils to have that, more old school feel with it. And sometimes, yeah, you have to just tell yourself to just shut up and be quiet and get out of your own head and just continue going. And then sometimes you have to just be like, okay, let me just stop and go do something else and then come back to it. And hopefully that negativity passes.
Very, very true. Very true. And sound advice as well. Speaking of advice, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Just believe in yourself. You are your biggest advocate for your work. If you believe in it and you see something of potential in it, don't let anybody else stop you from that. You're going to meet with rejection. That's just the way it works. If you decide to go public with it, you decide to share it, you're going to meet with rejection, whether it's agents or publishing houses respectfully declining, or you may very likely get that reader who doesn't quite understand where you're coming from and they don't leave the most positive review, or they leave a very positive review, but they don't give you 5 stars. They only give you 3 stars or 4 stars. So in the end, you're going to have some sort of criticism given to you, and making sure that you're able to take that criticism and grow from it. But also don't be afraid to stand up and say, no, this is how it needs to be. This is my work. This is how I see it going, and stand up for whatever it is that you're working on. I believe that no matter what you create, it has the capability of becoming something more. You just have to be the driving force behind it.
I love that. Thank you so much. How can the listeners connect with you further? Where can they find you? Where can they get your books?
I'm very active on Instagram, and I'm active on Twitter and Facebook. They're all very easy, at author Carmela or author Carmela Dutra. Very easy to find me. My website is carmeladutra.com. There you can learn more about myself, my illustrations. You can check out my portfolio. And if you're ever if you're an educator hearing this and you want to set up a virtual visit, or if things open up and we're able to do in-person visits again, there's information on my website about school visits, what they look like, what the program entails, the activities that are involved with it. And there you can also purchase signed copies of my books, or you can find me on any online retailer.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. This was wonderful.
Thanks.